Well, welcome to the lecture on sensitivity analysis. Now, before you go running for the hills because you're seeing an Excel spreadsheet, don't worry, I'm going to give you my Excel spreadsheet disclosure. You will not need to know Excel for any learning assignments or midterm finals, whatever. So don't worry about that. If I do provide anything on a midterm or learning activity, I'll give you some numbers so you don't have to use Excel. Okay, but I found that this was a really easy way to explain sensitivity analysis, and quite frankly, even for the novice, this particular Excel spreadsheet is super easy to build. Now, I'm going to provide you with this exact spreadsheet so you can go to town, go crazy on sensitivity analysis and project risk analysis to your heart's content if you wish. I'm also going to provide a link to literally a 3-minute video that shows you how to do this. And there's some really powerful concepts that are tying up really everything that we've done in the course so far in this particular exercise that we're going to do. So we are going to take a couple random walks as we go through our sensitivity analysis and bring back some concepts that we've talked about in previous modules. Because I found as I was building this that this was a very dynamic way of showing you how these numbers work, to do some of the things that to illustrate some of the concepts that we've been talking about really for the past 6 to 7 modules. All right, so how are we going to talk about sensitivity analysis and what is this all about? Well, within the textbook, we're looking at 3 different types of systems or analysis that you can take when assessing a project and looking at its risk or variability. Remember, those two are kind of together when making capital budgeting decisions. Should I buy a certain piece of equipment over another piece of equipment? And in the hospital world, these things are millions of dollars. Should you build a community health center? Should you build a women's health center? These things are decisions that you make about projects, and sensitivity analysis can help you in figuring out how to choose one or the other. The other nice thing about sensitivity analysis is that it can help you with your ongoing management of your organization. So often as a manager, we do not get an opportunity to pick a new project or help choose a new project. It happens, but quite frankly, it's not something that you do in a year-to-year kind of thing, maybe every few years. But what you're paid to do in your job is basically make decisions about how to run your organization, your department, your floor, your division, whatever, how to do those decisions and what is the best way to do them. In other words, I like to think about it, it's a kind of a cliche, but how to move the needle, what to place the emphasis on to get you where you want to go. And so often the case is you can't place an emphasis on a lot of things. You can maybe pick one thing. And that's where sensitivity analysis is good at, because it helps you try to pick that one thing that you can focus on to help you get to where you want to go, which is usually revenue. So it is a great tool for both of those things: ongoing projects, ongoing activities of your organization, and to assess new activities for the organization. Okay, so we are going to walk through a scenario, a case study. There's one presented in the book that's been going through the past couple of chapters and modules. It is a really good case study on a purchase of an MRI equipment. It's complicated. It's got a lot of moving parts going on with it. So with this particular case scenario, we're going to simplify things down. And but the concepts are still exactly the same that are presented in the more complex case in the book. So, all right. Let's begin our discussion of sensitivity analysis with its formal definition. And the formal definition is a change in response to a change in a single input with all other inputs held constant. Thank gosh, because as long if every little input was changed, it makes it so much more complex. But we're just going to change one thing and see how the system that we build, our little system, reacts. And the system that we build is basically going to be net present value. How is net present value going to react to these changes that we make within this case scenario? All right, so we're going to start off. The scenario is going to be, we're going to purchase a piece of equipment. It's going to be a CT scanner or a computed tomography scanner. And it's going to cost us $1.25 million or $1,250,000 to buy this scanner and put it in your hospital and connect all the power that it needs and all the computer connections and everything like that. So your initial outlay is $1.25 million. And that happens in year 0. At the very beginning. So we're going to call that year 0. And the life of this scanner, and this is particularly arbitrary, it can be whatever, but we're going to pick 5 years because I don't want to go too many years and make it too complicated. But we're going to pick 5 years. So this project, the scanner, is going to last for 5 years. At the end of the 5th year, we're going to get rid of it and buy a new scanner. And just like when you get rid of a car, usually you have trade-in value. Our scanner is going to have something called salvage value. And that salvage value is going to be $500,000. Now, we're going to go off some assumptions here. And the first assumption is that we're going to have $500,000 in patient revenue. I'm going to fill this out correctly here. Okay. Every year, we're going to have a given number of patients. We've calculated that we're going to have, I'm just going to make this up, we're going to see 5,000 patients every year. And the average revenue from a scan is going to be X amount. That number is pretty easy to get. We can pretty much find out what an average scan would cost when you look at all the different types of scans that people get. And you can come up with a number. And that number is going to be $500,000. This is going to be our base, and the book refers to it as our base case. Okay, so it's our starting point, if you will, in sensitivity analysis. Now, in the book, it does a lot of complex little things with patient revenue. Let me ask you this. When you go to the grocery store today and you buy, I don't know, you buy your box of Wheaties, and then 5 years from now, do you think that box of Wheaties is going to be the same price? No, it's going to go up. General Mills or whomever makes Wheaties, and I think it's General Mills, they're going to raise the price of that box of Wheaties a few cents every year. Just like patient revenue, you're going to charge a little bit more for your scans every year. So these numbers could be a little bit different every year, maybe a little bit higher in patient revenue. Maybe more patients are coming to see you because you're getting good word of mouth and your patient volume is increasing. You can plug all those in if you wish. Again, we're going to illustrate to keep it simple. We're going to keep it straight across the board for all 5 years. The book doesn't. The sample it uses builds in a slight increase every year, which is probably more realistic. The expenses, same thing. We're going to keep it level and flat for the 5 years. Now, your biggest expense is human resources. You have to pay those CT techs to do those scans. And I don't know about you, but I like a raise every year now. So those CT techs are going to get a little raise. Those expenses, those human resource expenses are probably going to go up a little bit every year. But in this case, we're telling everybody, you're not getting any raises for 5 years. So again, we're going to simplify that. The one big difference in our cash flows, are the things that are going to be happening over the next 5 years, is in the 5th year, remember, we're getting that salvage value. We're going to get $500,000 back right here at the end of year 5. Okay, so now we've plotted out all of our revenues, our expenses, and our little bonus at the end, our salvage value or trade-in value. We want to determine the annual cash flow for each of those 5 years. Really simple. It's just adding and subtracting. If you're wondering about the little brackets on here, on these numbers with our expenses, in the world of accounting, brackets are negatives, brackets are minuses. So that's a cash flow out. Okay, so we got money coming in, money going out, and there is our cash flow for year 1. Coming in, coming out, cash flow for year 2, and so on. So you can see that you have your cash flow as $280,000 every year. Except in year 5, where we have that bonus because we're trading in our old machine. It's got some wear and tear on it now, and we're going to get some money back for it. Okay, so now we know our cash flows. Pretty simple. It's just adding it up of the expenses, the revenues and expenses for the individual years. Here's the tricky part, and here's where you really need a computer or Excel or a really nice calculator to do this for you. This is a case of what's called unequal cash flows. And when you discount those back, that's the tricky part. What we did with like bonds, that was pretty simple because we had even cash flows over a period of time. Here, we have different cash flows. And these could be all different numbers. Now, we've simplified in that we have a different cash flow in year 5 and identical cash flows in year 1 through 4. But if we wanted to, we could make all these numbers different. Excel can easily digest all of those different cash flows and then come up with a present value for each one of them, a net present value. Okay, so what I've done here in the second part of our spreadsheet is simply, you can just see, brought down the cash flow right here, cash flow. Here's our cash flow in year 0. I've probably should have put that up here, but I got lazy. I put it down here. So there's the purchase of our scanner in year 0. Here is the discounted, the present value of that $280,000 for each year. And as you would expect, the present value of year 1 is more than the present value of year 4. And year 5 is kind of out of whack because we have a lot more money coming back. But that's also discounted back, or we're getting a present value on that particular cash flow for year 5. Now, to come up with net present value, all we have to do is add all these up together. And that is easily done. Again, you can write a simple formula, or you can get your calculator out and add it all up. I have it calculated right here, net present value of $121,000, or $121,891 and some change. Again, adding all of these cash flows together. Well, Chris, why didn't you do anything with the purchase amount? Well, that's our starting point. Remember, that's year 0. That is the present. That's the present day. That's like the instant today is what it is. So there's no discounting necessary. That $1.25 million that you're throwing out to the CT manufacturer is already discounted into the present current time. These numbers that you see here is the present value of the future cash flows. All of these numbers right here. So that simply just adds it all up together for me. But Chris, why do you have it listed down here again? Well, that's my check, because there's 2 ways to do this. And if you're a spreadsheet geek, I did this by longhand. You can see we have some formulas in here. And I did this by the wonderful easy formula method. There is a wonderful way to do this with Excel that has a built-in formula that will easily digest all of these uneven cash flows and come up with a single number for you. So that's my double check, is with the built-in formula that Excel has. So simply, this number here is our net present value, our 1.25 million going out the door, our present value of our future cash flows of 1.37 million coming in, and our present value of $121,891. Okay, but Chris, wait a second. What interest rate did you use? Whenever you discount something, whenever you come up with a present value, time value of money, you got to have an interest rate, right? That was right here. I listed that right here. And remember that percentages are listed as really our decimal points. So 100% is written as 1.00, but 10% is written as 0.1 or 0.10. 9% would be written as 0.09, or in the world of Excel, it thinks of it this way. So I used a discount rate of 10%. Now, where did that come from? Well, that's basically what my boss told me to use. That might have been the chairman of the board. That might have been some sort of organizational decision. And that was the required rate of return. They said, we're using a required rate of return of 10%. It's an arbitrary number that's thrown out by the organization that you're going to use to discount your cash flows. Okay. And remember that this particular case, we're going to call this our base case, or kind of our standard no change case. And we have a number, net present value. I built a little chart here that we're going to use to help make a graph. And I'm going to write that number in here real quick, because this was a zero change. Remember, sensitivity analysis is basing a change in a single response. We haven't changed anything yet. We're now going to start playing around with one variable, and that variable that we're going to play around with is patient revenue. But let's write down what we have for our base case real quick. So $121,891. And I forgot my one. Boom. Okay, so I've got that down. Now let's play with the variables, and we're going to play with patient revenue. Maybe we don't get as many patients as we thought. You know, what would be kind of the maybe worst case scenario? And you determine that it's 20%, negative 20%. You don't, for whatever reasons, the 20% of the patients didn't show, and your patient revenue is 20% less than that. 20% of $500,000 is $100,000. So we're going to change this variable down by 20%, which would bring it to $400,000. So let's do this real quick. And I'm going to do again, my little cheat. If you're wondering what I'm doing here, you can't really see it off video here, but I'm doing something called fill right. So it just automatically fills everything in for me rather than me typing it in. I could if I wanted to. Okay, so we got our 20% decrease. We've got our cash flows, which I have my spreadsheet here linked. So these cash flows are simply just brought straight down. I don't have to retype it because I could mess it up. So there it is there. Okay, it looks good. And then my present value for each one of these cash flows is calculated for me automatically. Again, my fancy dancy little longhand formula. Also my Excel easy peasy formula confirms they're both exactly the same. I haven't made a mistake. So good, looks good. All right, and wow, my net present value. I am not looking good. If I don't have 20%, if I have a drop in patients that I'm expecting of 20%, I'm in some deep trouble. So I'm going to write that number there. Remember, negatives are parentheses is bad. So But we'll go ahead and write that in there just so I have, as we're changing our single variables. Great. All right, now I'm going to bore you with just one more change here. Let's do, let's go ahead and do a 10%, the 10% decrease. And 10% of, remember, our base case was $500,000 or 500. 10% of that is 50,000. So now we're going to be at 450,000. So not as bad, but still not what we were hoping. Again, using my little cheat here to fill right. Fills everything in, plugs everything in. Things are getting a little better. Not quite the disaster as it was before. And I'm now at a negative 67,647. Again, getting that number from my net present value right here. Remember, the whole thing about sensitivity analysis, I'm only changing one variable. We're getting close here. Let me just do one more. Let's do the 20% increase. We already know what 20% of our base case is, which is $500,000. So now we're going to do of 20% of 500,000 is 100,000. So now we're going to do a 20% increase, $600,000. Boom. Wow. Life is getting a lot better. I now have a net present value of almost $500,000. I'm going to write that in here. Oh, there we go. Sorry, 20%. All right, now I'll do the other one right now, and we'll jump right back. Okay, well, I've gone ahead and filled out the rest of our table here with the 10% increase, the 20% increase, and so on our base case, all listed here. Remember, these are all numbers, our net present values that we've collected over a single change in one item, and that item was patient revenue. Now what we want to do is a graphical representation of this, and let's see what it looks like. Best way to do this is we're going to, this is where it might get a little bit more interesting. We're just going to do an insert we'll do a scatter graph here. And that looks pretty good. Yes, okay, I'm double checking my numbers here as I'm looking at the graph. Okay, because what we wanted to do is a graphical representation of a 10%, this is a 10% increase. Let's just check our numbers and make sure we're looking correct here. So if we have an increase of 10%, remember our base, our standard case that we were using, had a net present value of 100. Yep, that looks right. $121,000. A 10% increase in our base went up to 311,000 right here. All right, so yes, everything is looking correct. And if we have the decreases, again listed here, are decreases in patient revenue, 10%, 20, so on. We have the net present values going into the negative. So yes, everything looks good on our little graph. So what does the line tell us? The line really shows as a graphical representation of the response of net present value based on the changes in patient revenue. So what, for example, let's go back to the whole reason we started this was to compare two projects. So let's say you have a project with this linear line, this nice line right here, but you do another one on a separate project. Maybe it's a, I don't know, expansion of the ED department or something. And the line looks like this. Let's see if you can see that. Let's make that a little bit bigger for you. All right, so let's say the line looks like that. Well, which project is less risky? There is a lot less variability in here. So if things went, let's say, not as good as they should, let's say for this particular project, again, remember, you're comparing two projects to make a capital decision. You've gone through what we've just gone through for this CT project, and you've gone through the same thing for another project, and you've come up with this particular line right here. You can say to yourself that, well, this one is less risky. If things go bad and the particular patient revenue or the variable that I changed went down by 20%, I'm not hurting as bad as I'm hurting with this. If I have a 20% revenue loss, a change in that particular variable, that sensitivity, that particular variable, I'm out over $250,000. This one's not so bad. But of course, the exchange is I'm not going to hit one out of the park either. Best I could do would be $100,000 over my base case scenario. So again, something to think about. Now, what if I'm going to shift this line here? What if you were looking at these two projects? Which one would you pick? Well, and let me make sure let me change the color on that so you guys can see. There you go. There, red. All right, so this one for me there wouldn't be a choice. I would obviously choose the red one because worst case scenario, the negative, let's say the negative 20% loss of patient revenue for this particular two projects, I'm still just barely, you can see there, I'm just barely over the profit line or the net present value line. So I'm getting some return on this. Where the blue line, it's a lot of, I guess, high risk, high reward, but for me, is it that much of reward? If you look at my base case, in that center point here, it's the same. So I would choose the red line, would be mine. Now, if I was a risky manager and I said, what the heck, I'm going to go for it. Of course, I could be the hero of the day and get the big promotion, or I could get down here and get fired. So, and I think as a proper steward of the organization, you want to balance, these risk profiles to the nature of the organization. So that is how you can use it to compare two different cases. Remember, and I'm just playing with this line here, you can totally, you have to go through the same process with this that we've gone through for another project, and then put the two overlay on top of each other to compare. Basically, if you remember an old term, the slope. You're looking at the slope of these two investments is really important here. Okay. So that covers the basics of sensitivity analysis. We even talked a little bit about internal rate of return. So kind of talked about a few concepts, even the time value of money and present value, and bringing a future sum back to zero, which is now the present value. So hopefully this helped in tying in together some of the concepts. I do think sensitivity analysis is great for both separating two projects and trying to pick one out, also in trying to, what can I do to move the needle within my current organization to get the best response possible. And that's really what I do in my job on a day-to-day basis, is try to figure out what can we focus on this quarter, this year, that's going to get us to where we need to be. And usually I can only focus on one or two things. And again, with sensitivity analysis, it works really great because you are just using that to look at that change in response in a single change in input. So Excellent. Hopefully this wasn't too overwhelming for you. And again, we'll have those downloads. If you wish to play with this in Excel, go right ahead. And as always, thank you for watching.